Welcome to session 2 for MTSS for Educational Technicians. Today we are going to be talking about the problem-solving model.
So I do want to get started right off today and just talk about a few things about where we've been, where we're headed, and what we can expect, and just to kind of review a couple things that happened last week as well. So where are we headed? If you take a look, you'll notice that the very past signpost, way over on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll notice that we covered an MTSS overview last week, and we talked a little bit about your role as an ed tech in MTSS. Today, we're going to cover the problem-solving model and how the leadership teams at your schools are using an MTSS problem-solving model, and then how you can use your expertise and your knowledge of students and systems to be able to contribute to that problem-solving model. Next time, we're going to talk about data collection. There's a couple of data collection strategies that are important and that are relatively easy to implement. And then for the last session, we're going to talk about feedback. So those are the 4 MTS sessions in this series. Okay, so today's objective is we are going to be talking about the problem-solving model. And the problem-solving model is the model that schools that are implementing a multi-tiered system of support, whether that be a homegrown grassroots multi-tiered systems of support, whether it's PBIS, RTI, whatever the system of support is that your school is using, a quality multi-tiered systems of support is going to utilize a problem-solving model like the one that you see on the screen. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to define the problem, develop a plan, implement a plan, and then evaluate the plan, and what your role is as an ed tech in the importance of the fidelity of this model and how this model can be used to navigate between the tiers and navigate between the types of intervention that you are applying when trying to solve whether it be academic, behavioral, social, emotional challenges with students. So last week, we talked about tiers 1, 2, and 3. We talked about what it is, and we talked about what it isn't. What it is a layering of interventions based on student response. And we talked about what it isn't being the same intervention that's just delivered louder and longer, right? And so we talked last week about how tier 1 is really that preventative layer. It's the layer that all students get. And that when students are still struggling or still have needs that we need to address once all of the preventative measures have been put into place, that's when we start to think about how we can apply additional layers of support for those students. And so what we're going to do is we're going to increase the intensity of something that they're already receiving within that tier 1. And when you increase intensity, you increase the time and you narrow the focus. Notice how the preventative layer is in blue. When I add a higher intensity activity, I'm actually adding a different color onto my preventative layer, and I'm actually adding a red layer where I get my purple, which is my tier 2. I didn't take the blue away, I simply added another color or another intervention onto the prevention to get a new level or a new layer of intervention for a particular student. This usually applies to small groups of students. You'll have groups maybe 4, 5, 6, maybe even up to 8 in small groups that may need additional layers of support depending on their particular areas of need. Once a student is receiving an additional tier 2 intervention or a tier 2 support, you may find that a few more students will rise to the surface as needing even more need, or they have even more need, and so they have an increased need for even more supports, even more interventions, or even more layers of support to help them make achievement and continue to make gains in the classroom. That's where we get up into that tier 3 layer. Tier 3 is the preventative layer, plus the tier 2 layer, plus an additional layer that will hopefully increase their time even more and narrow the focus even more. And then again, we haven't taken the preventative and the tier 2 away, we've simply added on to those things. And so I think the metaphor that we used last week was of taking a group of students to the beach. We talked about how when you take a group of students to the beach, the preventative layer is to provide all students with sunscreen. And then a few students are going to have a particular area of need where the sunscreen's just not going to be enough. They may need a rash guard or a t-shirt or some other layer that is going to help to narrow the focus and increase the intensity of the intervention. And so you might ask them to wear a t-shirt. They may need a t-shirt to protect their skin from the sun. And then even still, you're going to have other kids that are going to need even more layers than that. And that's where you may have to ask them to wear a hat or to wear sunglasses, over their eyes to protect their eyes. And that students don't need to start in tier 1 to fail before they get to tier 2 or tier 3. There are going to be times where our students are going to come in and they're already going to be in that tier 3 level. They're already going to be in that tier 2 level. And so you'll notice that the continuum goes up and down. And we want our students to be able to navigate based on their own needs within those layers or within those tiers of intervention. Oh, what happened? Sorry about that. And so this was overall the basic universal RTI, or the universal model, or the universal overview of MTSS that we covered last week. Thinking about the problem-solving process. So this is the process that the MTSS teams are going to use when they are helping students navigate between the tiers of intervention based on the supports and systems that they are presenting with, or the struggles that they are presenting with. And so the 4 parts of the problem-solving process is: what is the problem? What are we going to do? Implement a plan, and then go through a reflection process of, did the plan work? And a lot of times this process is done without the involvement of you, the ed tech. Depending on the school that you work in, how long you've been there, and how they have their systems set up, many times this process happens on what would be considered the MTSS leadership team. And that may or may not involve the teachers or the ed techs for a particular group of students, or for a particular grade level, or for students that you work with. And so what's important is, how can you help to facilitate this process when it's done and you're not part of the process, right? And so one of the things that I wanted to do is, I actually wanted to offer an opportunity for folks to participate in thinking about this question in a small group activity. And so what I am going to do is, I'm going to generate some breakout rooms. And what you'll do in your breakout room is, you will ask this question, and you will think about, how can you contribute to the problem-solving model as an ed tech when you are not able to actually participate in the problem-solving framework that your team is actually participating in, okay? And so there's going to be about 7 people or so in each of the breakout rooms. And what I'll do is I will pop into each of the rooms to check on how things are going. But what I would recommend is take about a minute to just say who you are in your breakout room, and then ask yourself that question: how can you contribute to the problem-solving model as an ed tech? All right, and it will take just a second to get everybody sent out into their rooms. Once I click on open all rooms, you should have a pop-up that will come up where you can go to that room. And it'll take maybe 45 seconds or so to get everybody where they need to be. Well, welcome back, everybody. I think everybody is back in the main room now. So what I was hoping to do is actually have some folks share out from their session with their small group and answer the question: how can you as ed techs participate in the problem-solving model? And in what ways can you make sure that you are contributing to the problem-solving process for the kids that you're serving? And feel free to unmute yourself and offer some suggestions to the whole group. And you can also offer them in the chat as well.
Can I try? Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, in our group, we really have different response, but I think the main focus was knowing exactly what is the problem, because we have case by case. I work from kindergarten to 5th grade. So I collaborate with each classroom teachers to know the problem, and we have meeting all the time on how to solve the problem with each classes. So we have, but the main idea was to know the problem before finding solutions on how to help.
Great. So knowing what each of the problems is, and then making sure that you're looking for the solutions that are going to match that problem. That's excellent. What were some other ideas out there before I look at the chat?
Andrea, we talked about in our group the different sizes of schools and how some of them, the different teachers allow you to give your input on situations before they create the their solutions. We also talked about how important it is to know your kids and to be to feel comfortable enough to say, you know, this might be something that we could try after we've worked on other things that haven't worked out so well.
Do you have a specific way or a common way to collect that observational data?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Do you have a specific or common way in your building for how you're collecting that observational data to share?
Well, we don't work with the same student all day long. We switch up students so that we are in different situations, and we, after working with them and seeing how different things work, we go back and we give that data to the teachers so that when they have their meetings, they're able to share that information.
Well, that's actually another interesting thing to bring up, because many of you probably are working with different kids, right? And so having a common place to collect that data would be even more important from my perspective, right? And so how is your school handling making sure that everybody is collecting data and that it's accessible when needed, so you don't have to chase people down?
I've created Google Sheets and Google Docs and share it with all of my team that way.
Okay, so Google Sheets, Google Docs. Ashley, did you have something else that you were going to say?
I was just going to say we have weekly meetings where we discuss things and we document them.
Right, okay.
I'll go. Our team had a lot of the same ideas or same ways that they do as far as taking notes. I forgot to add into our discussion, we do daily charts on our kids. There's not a lot of notes on those depending on who's doing it. and the time available, but we also do debriefs, hopefully at the end of each day, or at least a couple times a week. Again, that depends on work schedules and just how crazy the day has been. And then somebody else in our group said that they meet one time a week with the EdTech administrator in their building so that they can share information.
This is Heidi from Great Work School, and back to Heidi Krieger, if I'm saying your name correctly.
Krieger, yep.
We do something very similar where we fill out like a behavior tracking form or a sheet where, depending on what their support needs are and what the students are working on, and we're supporting them with either behaviors and becoming more independent, or helping them with academics and supporting them in that framework. We always write down on that tracking form how many cues they may need, or what is going on in that day. And then all of that is shared with like the ed tech administrator person, and that person logs all of that. And I know that it's data collection that they look at for preparing their IAPs and meetings, but don't know entirely what that looks like.
So the key here that I think is really the part that that is the most important is there's multiple ways to do it. I'm seeing in the chat, I'm seeing open lines of communication, Google Sheets, tracking sheets, ABC sheets. Those are all vital pieces of information that are necessary for contributing to the problem-solving process. And because each of you is in a different situation and each of you is asked to participate with your students in a different way, sometimes you're with one student for an hour, sometimes you're with them for half a day, sometimes you're with them for a particular class, and that class could change from AM to PM depending on whether you're on a waterfall schedule or whether you're in an elementary school or whether that you're in a high school situation. But data collection is the number one most important way that you can contribute to the problem-solving model. And making sure that everything is collected in and stored in a secure but also common place, so that teachers or MTSS teams, when they are preparing to meet to talk about an individual student and how to meet their individual needs, then they'll know where they can find the information on each of the students that is participating or being a topic of discussion during the problem solving process as they navigate in between the tiers. And so when you go back to your schools or when you're having conversations with your supervisors, if you don't already have a system in place that would allow for information to be easily accessed, even in the drop of a moment, you've got a new child has popped up or a new problem has popped up, and they're going to hold a for lack of a better term, an emergency meeting on that child or an emergency intervention for that child. What if you've been out sick for a week and you had some really important information about that student that you think is going to be useful in that problem-solving meeting? So any records that you can keep, any data that you can keep, that because you guys are the eyes on that kid when that kid is not under the eyes of the person sitting at the problem-solving meeting, right? So how would you represent yourself? So the question that I want you to think about as you move from this session to this coming Thursday's session, where we're going to get into even deeper discussion on data collection and data analysis, I want you to be thinking about yourself as an individual. Think about yourself and your strengths as an ed tech, okay? And I want you to really think about if you had to leave something for someone that you couldn't be there to represent yourself, what would be the most important parts of that? And how could you present a student's strengths and challenges in a way that would be the most easily understood for a stranger, basically, to look at it during a formal problem-solving process meeting, so that that child's needs are represented in the absolute most effective way possible. So that's sort of your homework or your reflection for the next couple of days is as an ed tech, how could you make absolutely certain that you are presenting information and contributing to the problem-solving process for the kids that you see every day in the most effective way possible? I did see one thing come up in the chat that I wanted to talk about that I hadn't planned on talking about that I thought was really powerful to me. Laura offered, and I don't know, others could have written this too, but this one just happened to stick out to me. Laura offered that she takes the time to talk with students and truly listen to their concerns, frustrations, successes, and then share it with the supervising teacher. That is so important, right? To talk to your kids and ask them and get their input. A lot of times these problem-solving frameworks or these problem-solving meetings, MTSS leadership meetings, they happen to kids, but not necessarily with kids, right? In a lot of ways. And for an elementary student, I can kind of understand. Even for some middle school students, I can kind of understand. You know, and then you get into the high school, you know, and you really try to bring that kid into the discussion a lot more because it's their life that you're talking about, right? And as they get older and they want to play more of an important role in their own decision making and things like that. But in particular with the younger kids, knowing that this particular child is even having to navigate these tiers or these layers of intervention, taking the time to really hear and collect their thoughts and feelings about what is happening to them is a vital, vital piece of the problem-solving model that I think sometimes is missing. And I don't think it's missing intentionally. But I think when you've got a school of 400 kids, or you've got a school of 600 kids, sometimes you've got a school of 200 kids, it can be so hard to have all the minutes or all the time that you need to represent each of those kids. And so as the ed tech, as the eyes on the student, as the eyes in the building, in your conversations with your kids, don't forget, jot down what they said that they were feeling. Jot down what they said that they were concerned about. Don't just write down things like, oh, Johnny had a tantrum for 8 minutes as we entered the lunchroom. What was the root cause? Did something happen in math class that day, right? What are they concerned about that's going on at home? So as you're reflecting on your homework, right, where how could you design a way to best represent kids at this meeting that they are not a part of and that you sometimes are not a part of? Don't forget the emotional piece of what that child is experiencing, because the kids that have to wear the t-shirt to protect their skin from the sun, or the kids that have to wear a hat and a t-shirt to protect themselves from the sun, they automatically feel different. And so their needs and their concerns and their heartbreaks and their heartaches and their challenges are all vital parts and vital contributions to that problem-solving model. And one of the roles of the ed tech, the person that's with them in some of their most vulnerable moments, this is an opportunity for you guys to help make sure that when these kids are being asked to do something that maybe their best friend doesn't have to do, you can make sure that they were represented from all angles, academically, behaviorally, emotionally, and humanly, because that's who they are, right?